village of the damned. Once I was driving to my friend's summer house. It was an ordinary working Friday. By evening, anticipating the taste of barbecue and beer, I was already speeding down the highway from the city towards the summer house. It was not far, only 30 kilometers from the city, and I knew the road by heart. I could have found it with my eyes closed. Nothing complicated, almost all the way straight, and only at the end, you needed to turn towards the village of Graskoy, and from there it was just a stone's throw away. That day there was a thunderstorm and rain, and visibility on the road was poor, so I was driving slower than usual. I definitely didn't want to get into an accident today. Halfway down the road, I got stuck in a traffic jam. Where could this have come from on the highway? After 2 hours of crawling along, I saw the cause of the traffic jam. Road repairs. As always, whenever I drive, there are always adventures, roadworks, accidents. Well, I'll have to take a detour. And how convenient. Right before the barriers set up by the workers, there was an exit onto a dirt road and a sign indicating that there was a detour through a village. Asham, the sign was so old that the village name was unreadable. Well, maybe it's not so bad. I'll be delayed a bit more taking the detour around the roadworks and then speed off to my friends. As I turned off the road, I noticed that I was the only one who decided to take the detour. All the other cars immediately turned around and headed back towards the city. Strange. Maybe they knew a shorter way? Well, whatever. I had already turned onto the dirt road and didn't feel like turning back. Of course, there were no streetlights on this road, and the road itself was old and seemed to be rarely used by cars, but it was hard to see because the rain had turned it into a muddy mess. I just hoped I wouldn't get stuck in this quagmire of dirt and clay. Driving was difficult, especially in my not-so-new sedan. And then, in the distance, I saw rooftops. It was already past midnight, and the rain was turning into a light hail. Great. Just what I needed. Continuing to drive in such weather was nearly impossible, so I decided to call my friends to tell them I'd arrive in the morning and try to find shelter in this village, hoping someone would take me in. I picked up my phone. Of course. No signal. It's the 21st century, and just a few kilometers off the main road, you're in the Middle Ages. Well, I hope my buddies, in their drunken stupor, won't start looking for me in the middle of the night and will just fall asleep, so I can drive up to them in the morning. I drove up to the first houses. Judging by the looks of it, this village consisted of just one road with houses on either side. Speaking of houses, they didn't look particularly inhabited. As for the other houses, I couldn't see them, but the first two gave me a bit of a shock. Saying they were old was an understatement. They were decrepit, rotten, overgrown with impassable thickets of bushes. There wasn't a light in any of the windows. This didn't surprise me after all. It was late, and people were probably asleep already. Although, were there any people here at all? Suddenly, lightning flashed, and I glimpsed a silhouette on the road. It was tall, I'd even say lanky, with arms that seemed longer than those of a regular person, dressed in some rags. In that brief moment of illumination after the lightning, it ran towards the nearest house to me. It all happened in an instant. I thought maybe, due to the poor visibility and fatigue, I imagined it as some sort of monster. It was, of course, a person running home to escape the hail, I told myself. Excellent, so there are people in this godforsaken place, and I can negotiate for a night's shelter. I really didn't want to get out of the car. The rain was so heavy that even 30 seconds outside would soak you to the bone. But there was no choice. Sleeping in the car was not an option at all. I drove as close as possible to the house where the person had run. I took my bag with me, with some money in case the hosts asked for payment for the stay, and gathering my strength, I jumped out of the car. I ran towards the entrance door under the porch. I got soaked instantly. It became cold and damp. What a weather in early October. How does that song go? There's no bad weather. There is. Oh, there certainly is. The porch I found myself under was leaking, but it was still better than standing in the pouring rain. I knocked on the door. Hello? Is anyone home? Silence. I knocked again. Nothing happened. I tried to open it, no luck. What should I do? Running to another house would mean getting completely soaked and quite possibly catching a cold. No, I didn't need that. Maybe I should go around the house and see if there's another door. I needed to investigate. With this plan in mind, I moved along the side of the house, glancing at the window. For a moment, it seemed like I saw some movement inside. Struggling through the overgrown bushes, I I reached the back of the house. There was indeed a door here, leading to the backyard, although I wasn't sure if these standing crosses constituted a backyard. Wait, crosses? Where did these crosses come from? The back of this house looked more like an old cemetery than a backyard. Something was off. I didn't have time to process what I saw because the door behind me creaked open. Without thinking, I darted inside. The door closed. Probably a draft. The house smelled musty, damp, and a bit like something was burning. Well, at least the rain was no longer an issue. I took out my phone and turned on the flashlight, quickly noticing that the battery was down to 15%. I started scanning the room with the flashlight. A table, a chair, a mug, plates. Aha, I was in the kitchen. I then remembered that I had barged into the house uninvited and should at least let the owners know I was here. Hello? Could you please let a guest stay the night? If needed, I can offer some money for your help. Silence, and only the sound of raindrops on the roof broke it. Well, if no one is here, maybe I can spend the night unnoticed, and if the owners come, I'll explain everything nicely. So I had a plan. I needed to find at least a bed. Sleeping on the floor was not an option. There was no bed in the kitchen, so I needed to venture deeper into the house. The floor creaked loudly under my steps. The atmosphere was unsettling. Night, an old house with its own cemetery in the backyard, creaky floors. Every horror movie I'd ever seen came to mind. A chill ran down my spine. I walked through the kitchen and entered a small room. On the wall hung a large clock. You know, the kind that chimes every hour as many times as the current hour. They looked very old, and the hands on the clock were strange. In this room, I also saw a table with some rags on it, stained either with soil or something else. The room was in terrible condition. Wallpaper was peeling off the walls, the ceiling was covered in water stains, and the overall appearance was dreadful, with smeared dry dirt on the floor. Next to the table stood a spring bed. Its headboard was very rusty, which suggested that no one lived in this house. Nobody would sleep on such an old bed. Nobody except me. Sleepiness hit me unexpectedly. No wonder, with a whole week of sleep deprivation plus over 5 hours on the road. Indeed, these 30 kilometers to the summer house turned out to be much longer. Without much ceremony, realizing the house was probably abandoned and the owners wouldn't come, I sat on the bed, not fearing it would collapse, sending me crashing through the rotten boards to the basement below. I wondered if there was a cellar here. Well, the bed didn't fall apart. That was a good sign. Using my bag as a pillow, I closed my eyes and fell asleep without noticing. Somehow, the fear completely vanished. I woke up to a strange sound. It seemed like someone was walking in the kitchen, and the floor creaked under their steps. Opening my eyes and trying to figure out what I was doing there, I sat up on the bed and shouted, "Is anyone there? Mayor." The steps stopped. Someone was definitely there. I got up from the bed and went to the kitchen. No one. I turned on my phone's flashlight. The floor was covered in fresh dirt. What was this? What was wandering around at night all covered in dirt? And where did it go? My thoughts started to jumble with fear. Turning towards the exit from the kitchen, I saw a tall shadow dart into the room. I ran there. More dirt. It led to a small hatch in the floor. How did I not notice it when I first came in? Well, should I go down there or forget about it, having never fought with any evil spirits before? I sat on the bed, thinking about what to do next. I probably wouldn't be able to sleep anymore, and running to the car didn't appeal either. I had just dried off, and the rain hadn't let up at all. I had to go find out what was going on. In my bag, I found my old Swiss Army knife, at least some kind of weapon. Though if it was something supernatural, it probably wouldn't help. Gathering my courage, I approached the hatch. Open it? No. Why? What if there's something interesting down there? Like a ghoul or something. Very interesting indeed. Well, I had to do something, right? I had to. Finishing the argument with myself, I started opening the hatch. Its handle was covered in the same dirt and smelled so bad I almost saw my dinner again. It smelled of death. This was beyond anything normal. Since I was already dirty, I had to see it through. The hatch was open. I shone my phone's flashlight down there. Wooden steps leading into the darkness, and nothing else visible. Greet. Descending into the unknown. I noticed that my phone was down to 5% battery. Okay, I'll go down quickly, look around, send any evil spirits to the afterlife, and go to sleep. Sounds like a plan. Just as I leaned over to start descending, something suddenly pushed me from behind, and I tumbled down. Silence. Pain in my head. I was lying on something hard and unpleasant. Feeling it with my fingers, I realized it was something porous and solid. A bone. It was a bone. I instantly jumped up and shone my flashlight around, discovering that the entire floor of the basement was covered in bones and human skulls. I was paralyzed with fear. Where had I ended up? Who had pushed me? How could I get out of here? While my thoughts were sluggishly processing after the impact on my head, something in the corner started to stir. Something was sitting there, eating, judging by the chewing sounds. Suddenly the sound stopped, and it began to rise slowly, probably standing about 2.5 meters tall. It had dry, long legs, hands that hung below its knees, and on its hands, crescent-shaped fingers or claws, hard to tell. Its head was unnaturally toothy. It looked like a stretched, gnawed skull. There were no eyes, or I just didn't notice them. This ghoul lunged at me with a scream. Dropping my phone, I barely managed to dodge it and fell. Get up, I mumbled to myself. Instantly turning around, the creature lunged at me again. This time I couldn't dodge, and a sharp claw slashed across my chest. Pain shot through my entire body, and apparently not just mine. The creature roared and fell beside me. The Swiss Army knife was sticking out of its chest. I had to run. I had to get out of here. I definitely didn't have a second knife. I jumped up and bolted up the stairs, grabbing my phone off the floor. Then I heard the ghoul getting to its feet and already running towards me. With all the remaining strength, I climbed the steep steps, not even thinking about the ground and rotten flesh under my hands and feet. Suddenly, something grabbed my leg and started pulling me down. How fortunate that my boots had zippers instead of laces. Quickly unzipping it in one motion, the boot stayed with the creature, and it fell down. I opened the hatch, and it was already dawn outside. With a swift motion, grabbing my bag, I rammed into the front door, the one that was locked, hoping to break it down. Either I weighed too little, or I didn't have enough momentum, but the door met me with a dull thud, and I flew back. The bolt. The door had a bolt. I was a blind fool. Quickly standing up, I ran to the door, unbolted it, and heard disgusting breathing behind me. Without looking back, I opened the door, dashed out of the house, and ran to the car. The rain had stopped, and a fog was creeping along the ground. Sitting in the car, I instantly released the handbrake and drove off. Glancing in the rearview mirror, I saw only an old cemetery, no houses. And outside stood about 5 of those terrifying creatures watching me drive away. I eventually reached the summer house. My friends were almost speechless when they saw me in the morning. Dirty, with a bloody slash across my chest, missing a boot, completely disheveled. I told them everything. My friend looked at me in confusion and said, "There is no village there. There's only an ancient cemetery, and it appeared after. Wait, there used to be a village, but it burned down more than 100 years ago. Everyone who lived there died, and they buried all the residents there, on the site of the burned down village. Yeah, we better take a different road home."